Right now, in South Texas, there is a lake that is supposed to hold hundreds of billions of gallons of water. Instead, it holds almost nothing. Lake Corpus Christi, one of the two primary reservoirs supplying water to 500,000 people, is sitting at just over 8% of its total capacity. Its sister reservoir, Choke Canyon, is below 8% full. Together, they have fallen from nearly half full just 4 years ago to almost completely empty today. And the city's own computer models, the official projections made by the people responsible for keeping the taps on, show one scenario that ends with those reservoirs going completely dry as soon as this summer. Not in 10 years, not in 5, this summer. The city manager stood in front of cameras in March and said, "I think we are going to get through this. This is no time to panic." But the former director of the Corpus Christi Water Department, a man who spent his entire career expanding this city's water supply, saw those same numbers and said something very different. "It's the very worst scenario that I've ever seen. It's going to be an economic disaster." This is the story of how one of the biggest cities in Texas ran out of water, and why the people responsible for preventing it let it happen anyway. To understand just how close Corpus Christi is to the edge, you need to understand how the system works. The city draws its water from 3 sources. The main 2, Lake Corpus Christi and Choke Canyon Reservoir, sit on the Nueces River in South Texas. Together, they are supposed to be the backbone of the water supply for the entire region, 500,000 residents across 7 counties, plus one of the largest concentrations of oil refineries, chemical plants, and petrochemical facilities in the entire United States. As of late March 2026, those 2 reservoirs combined are sitting at 8.4% capacity. To put that in terms you can visualize, imagine filling a bathtub and then draining it until there is barely a thin layer of water covering the bottom. That is where Corpus Christi is right now. The third reservoir, Lake Texana, sits about 100 miles away and was the emergency lifeline, the city's last card to play. It was recently around 55% full, but Lake Texana is now also declining, and the city's own water manager said in March that it had entered extreme drought conditions with very little new water flowing in. The city now has official planning scenarios that assume no meaningful rainfall for the remainder of the year, not as a worst case, but as a baseline for planning. 5 consecutive years of record heat and drought in South Texas have driven this system to the edge. Rainfall in the region has been running at less than 60% of normal for years. The ground is so dry that even when rain does fall, it soaks straight into the cracked earth before it can run off into the rivers and reservoirs. The water supply that was built around the climate of the 1990s is operating inside a climate that no longer exists. A formal Level 1 water emergency, the trigger point at which the city is legally required to begin mandatory water cuts across all users, could be declared as early as this May. After that trigger, the city has 180 days before supply can no longer meet demand. Do the math. 180 days from May is November 2026. Here is what is not making headlines. The 500,000 residents of Corpus Christi and its surrounding communities are not the ones draining this reservoir. Industrial users account for more than half of the entire region's water consumption. The Corpus Christi landscape is packed with petrochemical plants, steel mills, natural gas export terminals, and oil refineries. These facilities are not small operations. They are billion-dollar industrial complexes that were built and expanded during a period when the water was plentiful and nobody was asking hard questions about what would happen if the rain stopped. And standing at the very top of that industrial water consumption chart is a single facility, a massive plastics manufacturing plant jointly operated by ExxonMobil and Saudi Arabia's state-owned chemicals company known as SAVIC. That one facility alone consumes approximately 25 million gallons of water per day. To put that number in context, 25 million gallons per day is the equivalent of the water consumed by every single residential customer in Corpus Christi, every household, every apartment, every tap, combined. One plant, one day, equal to the entire city. The Valero refinery and ExxonMobil's ethylene cracker facility together consume roughly 1/4 of the total system supply. Add in Flint Hills Resources, which operates 2 refineries, turning up to 350,000 barrels of crude oil per day into fuels distributed to San Antonio, Austin, Waco, and Dallas-Fort Worth. A nearby Tesla lithium plant in Robstown draws an estimated 2 to 3 million gallons per day. These facilities were promised this water. The contracts were signed, the permits were issued, the deals were made by city and port officials who were at the same time being asked by scientists and water engineers whether the supply could actually sustain this level of growth. The answer, repeatedly, was no. Those warnings were ignored.
The roots of this crisis go back more than a decade. After the shale revolution transformed South Texas into one of the most valuable energy production zones in the world, the port of Corpus Christi, the nation's top crude oil export port, became an engine of economic growth. Billions of dollars poured in. ExxonMobil and Saudi Aramco's joint venture opened in 2022. A steel dynamics mill arrived. Refineries expanded. Every one of those industrial facilities was promised water from the city's municipal supply. Every one of those promises was made on a foundation of projections that assumed the rainfall patterns of the previous century would continue indefinitely. At the same time, city leaders spent over a decade attempting to build a large seawater desalination plant, the one infrastructure project that could have drought-proofed the system and broken the city's dependence on rainfall. Cost estimates ballooned from $757 million to $1.3 billion. In September 2025, the city voted to kill the project. By then, the reservoirs were already collapsing. The former CEO of the Port of Corpus Christi Authority, the man who watched this unfold from the inside, put it plainly. The impacts are going to be felt tremendously through the state, if not internationally. This should be no surprise to anybody. We were talking about this over a decade ago. The city's own former water director, James Dodson, was even more direct. We did not simultaneously add new water supply. We thought everything was going to be okay, but it was not going to be okay, and we should have known better. Here is where the compounding begins. When the city of Corpus Christi enters a formal water emergency, the rules say all users must cut back: residents, businesses, industry. But here is the problem that nobody is saying loudly enough. You cannot simply turn down a refinery. These are not faucets. Refineries and petrochemical plants are engineered to operate at a specific continuous flow of water for cooling systems and steam generation. They are designed for steady-state operations. Abruptly cutting the water supply to a facility processing hundreds of thousands of barrels of crude oil per day doesn't just slow production, it creates serious safety risks, equipment failure, pressure imbalances, in a worst-case scenario, explosions. One city council member, speaking about the industrial users at a public meeting, said the quiet part out loud. There is no penalty for them not doing curtailment. Are you going to shut off their water? I don't think so. The city attorney responded that in an emergency, the city does have the authority to sit down with large water users and directly cut them back, potentially, maybe even going so far as to cut them off. But he said it carefully, theoretically, because everyone in that room understood the economic weight they were dealing with.
The region's refining capacity is close to 1 million barrels of refined products per day, including 450,000 barrels of gasoline, roughly 5% of the entire nation's supply. Flint Hills Resources delivers jet fuel via pipeline directly to airports in Dallas and Austin. Any disruption to that supply chain does not stay in Corpus Christi. It moves instantly through Texas and beyond. Gasoline prices, airline fuel costs, freight costs, all of it tightening because a city ran out of water. The economist who studied this called the situation directly. The presence of refineries in Corpus Christi are shifting the severe water shortage from a local problem to an issue with significant potential economic ramifications for the state and nation.
In the middle of all of this industrial calculus are the 500,000 people who just need water to come out of their taps. 40 miles outside the city, in rural Jim Wells County, a retired chemical plant worker named Bruce Mumm watched the water level in his private well drop below his pump last year. He went 3 days without water while he found a technician to lower it. The repair cost thousands of dollars. He is one of dozens of rural landowners who now fear that the city's emergency drilling into nearby aquifers, its scramble to find any water it can reach, will drain the underground supplies that their own wells depend on. "People like me are probably going to be running out of water," he said. "Then this property and house is useless." In the town of Taft, 5 miles from the ExxonMobil plant, the mayor is trying to rehabilitate old wells just to keep water flowing to her residents. "Funding is always going to be the issue," she said. "A small town, a dwindling supply, and a $10 billion industrial facility right next door." Meanwhile, Texas Governor Greg Abbott declared a state emergency and began issuing waivers, suspending normal permitting requirements to let the city drill wells and pump groundwater faster. The emergency orders pushed the formal water crisis deadline from May to at least July. It bought months. Months, not years, months. And even those months depend on Lake Texana, the emergency backup reservoir 100 miles away, not dropping too far, which it is already doing. Here is the number that nobody in power will say in public. The Texas state climatologist John Nielsen Gammon has projected that Texas could face conditions drier than any megadrought experienced in the last 1,000 years by the latter half of this century. The State Water Plan, the official document that is supposed to guide water policy for the next 50 years, does not account for climate change in its supply or demand projections. They planned for a Texas that no longer exists. And right now, today, in April 2026, the city of Corpus Christi is the proof. Choke Canyon fell from 47% full to below 8% in 4 years. Not slowly, not gradually, 4 years. That is what aridification looks like when it arrives, not as a warning, but as a wall. The ExxonMobil facility drilled emergency test wells to try to find its own water supply. The water they found was too salty to use. The $1.3 billion desalination plant, the one that could have prevented all of this, was killed in September 2025 to save money. The city is now looking at restarting it under a new design. Construction would take years. The reservoirs have months. Texas is the top crude oil exporting state in America. Its largest oil export port is in Corpus Christi. The refineries there supply jet fuel to the airports of Dallas and Austin. The plastics plant there is co-owned by the Saudi government, and all of it, every barrel, every chemical, every flight, runs on water that is nearly gone. The taps are still flowing, for now, but every single day without rain, the number gets smaller. 8% and falling. The city's water dashboard is public. You can check it right now. Just search for Corpus Christi Water Supply Dashboard. The update in real time. Watch it yourself.
Subscribe if you want to know what happens when it hits zero. Because right now, nobody in charge has a plan that gets there fast enough.